Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and I'm often asked what I mean when I say a reel is grease choked. And I thought this would be a good example of it. This is a Mitchell 306. This one came in from Scott, and it's turning very difficult. It's hard, but it's not impossible to turn, but it is hard to turn. And that is almost always a sign that it's loaded with dried grease, and I call it choking because the reel cannot perform as it should because of the dried grease getting in the way. So this is a real easy one to show, and we'll show you how to fix it as well. There's only a single take-apart screw on the side plate for the Mitchell 306. I guess I didn't get it all the way. And if you look underneath, then you're going to see there's just a whole host of this dried grease on the side case right there. It's almost like a tar type of a substance. And if I look through that, I can see it's all over the main gear as well. So let's show you how to take care of that, how to get this one back out there screaming again. With the 306, you're going to remove the double pin that holds the axle shaft in place. And once you do that, you can remove the axle shaft, spool 2. And this is a good example as well. When I was pulling it out, I just felt that it was difficult to pull out. Well, sure enough, all that dried grease has gotten onto the axle shaft as well. So I'm just going to use a piece of steel wool. I'm going to just kind of buff all of that out until I don't feel that dried grease anymore. There's a little bit on the here. And all of that stuff is, well, it becomes an inhibitor rather than a facilitator, if you will. It becomes a bad thing rather than a good thing when the grease is in the reel, but the grease is all dried up and has lost its capacity to provide that slip that you need. All right, so I buffed out the axle shaft. I'm going to put that into a parts tray. I always take my pieces and parts and put them there. The spool came off, which is okay. I'm going to put that to the side. I don't need to worry about the spool too much. This is your crosswind block, and look at how it's choking here. It's got all that grease that's just kind of lined up, and every time that goes up top on the stroke, it's bumping against the top of the reel, and it's slowing the performance. So I'm just going to use a little pick first to clean out that old grease. And it's not unusual. If it was something unusual, maybe I'd make it unique video on it, but it's not unusual at all. What happens is whoever was using the reel stopped using it. The reel sat around in storage, usually in a hot place like a shed or a garage in the summertime or a cabin or someplace. And well, that hot air is going to dry it all out. Eventually it's just going to congeal. And then, as I say, I call it grease choked. Maybe that's my own term, but grease choking to me means that the reel just can't do what it's supposed to. All right, we're going to try and remove the handle now. That's going to help us free the main gear. Do that in a clockwise manner on these. And now you're kind of getting down to some of the more dirt. You remove the planetary wheel. I'm going to take out the oscillation gear, and everything that I'm picking and pulling here is just kind of getting stuck because of the dried grease. Well, if you like these kinds of videos as I continue to just kind of clean up and show you how to get this one back to performing, then I would encourage you to subscribe. And if you do subscribe, please hit the notification button. That'll let you know when I'm posting the videos. And you can make a decision as to whether you want to go watch that video if it means something to you. In this case, I'm working on a large vintage saltwater reel. In other cases, I'll be working on freshwater reels, bait casters, some big trolling reels, all kinds of things. And those notification buttons help you. All right, I just took a very broad screwdriver. There's actually a coin slot in this top nut on the rotor. That coin slot, you can use a dime or something to that, or you can use a very broad screwdriver. Don't go ahead and try and use a thin bladed screwdriver like this. That's way too thin. And what will happen is you'll wind up flaring that slot. So go for a broad screwdriver if you choose to use the screwdriver. And once you do that, that's going to free the rotor. We should be able to remove this. And be careful underneath that now, because there's a keyway here. It's a little kind of a square pointy piece that sits in that pinion gear. If you lose that, well, the rotor is going to spin without holding to the shaft. That's a great reason why I use these parts trays, because small pieces like that oftentimes will be a problem. All right, this one has a screw holding down the next piece, which is a pivot for your pinion gear. So let's go ahead and see if we can't take that screw out. That's a little too much, so I'll go for a micro driver. Always want to match the blade on your screwdriver with the slot in your screw. You don't want to go too small for bigger screws, as they will flare, was what we were talking about before. Okay, we're going to just pull this off. And then there's a belt trip ring underneath. Tie down screw goes in, and this whole ring will come off then. That's going to go into my tray. And this is what we were going for now. This is a pin that's holding that pinion gear assembly in. You want to go ahead and remove that pin. That should simply pull out, just like that, and that's the pin. Once that pin is out, this whole piece will just push up, just like that. And that gives you access now to the main gear. Before I remove that main gear, I want to make sure that that anti-reverse dog, which sits behind it, is thrown into the off position. That's the off position there. And then we'll just do a quick kind of a scrape here, just because it's going to impede the main gear from getting out. Just scrape off some of that excess grease that we've noted, kind of chunky style. Once you do that, you should be able to push through on the main gear, just like that. So your main gear is out, and you can see that that old grease has gotten behind the gear. It's gotten in the case, and I'm going to use some penetrating oil just to break that up. All right, while I'm at it, then let's go ahead and continue to clean this. As I mentioned, Scott found this reel. He doesn't pay too much when he goes to these flea markets, but generally there's a condition issue of some description. In this case, the reel wasn't performing optimally. We've seen why that is, and quite honestly, you can get some very nice bargains if you know what to look for when purchasing that reel. So one of the things that helps identify a grease-choked reel as opposed to a broken reel is that the reel will function, but it won't function efficiently. So when you turn the handle, the rotor's going to turn, the axle shaft's going to go up and down. There's not going to be any unusual noises or anything. It's just simply going to be a very, very sluggish reel. If that's the case, and you want to take the time to go do a little bit of cleaning, like we're doing here, then you're going to be able to save that reel. And quite honestly, it's going to work beautifully when it's done. All right, so we've taken care of this planetary track. The oscillation gear, most of that grease that was on there melted off with the penetrating oil. We've hit the back end of this with the penetrating oil, and you can see that it just kind of loosens that grease up pretty easily. And all I'm using here is a paper towel. When it comes to greases and cleaning reels, I like to use the least abrasive type of removal equipment as I can. In this case, if I can get away with a paper towel, then that's what I'm going to go for first. If it gets more stubborn, then I'm going to go to a kitchen scrubby. Those are those green pads that you can buy. And then, well, you saw me on the one with the axle shaft. I'll go to a 4.0 steel wall. I'll never go any higher than a 4.0. 4.0 is a polishing steel wall, and that's usually enough to get this done. All right, I'm going to take a brush now, a hard brush. You can use a wire brush, you can use a toothbrush, you can use a bristle brush. Any of the above will be fine. I'm just clearing the channels out of that main gear. And as I'm clearing those channels out, I want to make sure that all those teeth are uniform, that there's no bends, chips, or cracks this way. And also check the teeth this way to make sure that there's good points on all of them. And then we can come over and clean the base structure here. So again, the penetrating oil's had a little bit of time. You don't need much. It's had enough time that for the most part, all of that old grease is out of there now. And it's almost time to just reassemble this reel and get this one back to Scott with a second chance to go fishing. All right, just a little bit more here. Now notice there's a couple of different dogs in the 306. I'm not sure if you have one and if you have it apart and if it's the same setup. This one has a spring that loads on a slot in the dog, and it comes around and it anchors itself in a slot in the case. Some of these have a screw that's holding this in, and it wraps a spring around it so that the back end of the spring is pulling this up, and the tail end of the spring usually anchors behind this stud here. So don't be surprised if the reel you're working on has a little bit different mechanism for that anti-reverse dog. Now that it's clean, I'm going to put some fresh oil onto that dog. Then we'll come over here and we'll just service this pinion gear. Pinion gear's got a bushing on it, not a bearing. And we want to make sure that we can put a little bit of grease onto the inside of that bushing so that that bushing slides easily. Then we want to check the same thing here. There's no grease built up inside this, but you want to check the teeth and make sure that they're all uniform and not bent or disfigured in any regard. If it is, you'd feel a catching on the reel when you went to do the spin on it. There is a properly greased teeth, a little bit of grease on there. Now let's grab the bushing. You're going to notice that the bushing has a hole on one side. That's where that piece came through. When you go to load this in, that hole belongs on the top end of the assembly, not below. If you've put that in upside down, that hole will not align with your case. All right, we're going to take our main gear now. We're going to do the same thing here. We've already checked the teeth on it. Let's go ahead and put a light coat of grease there. A little bit of grease into the track where that planetary gear is going to sit, and a little bit on the face where the oscillation gear is going to sit, and then some grease in the teeth that are going to interact with that pinion gear. Well, while I'm doing this, if you have any questions on this reel or any reel, maybe you're working on one and you're a little stuck, maybe you've purchased one in a flea market or something and you just can't figure out why it's not performing the way it should, well, if you leave that question in the comment section, I will try to answer that for you. And if I don't know the answer, I'll try and point you to someone who may. Take that greased up main gear and put that back into the arm from the case. Now we're going to take the pinion gear, look for the hole, because you want to align the hole in the bushing with the hole in the case, and then work that down. I'm just going to put a pick in there so that I get that hole completely aligned, just like that. So you'll see that the hole lines up. And then you want to find the little tie-down piece that's going to hold that in place. And you want to push that all the way in. Sometimes you have to play with it. Sometimes it's not directly lined up. That's where that pick helps to the alignment. Whatever you do, don't force these. Take your time. Well, I just lost my battery, so I had to stop and change, and I apologize. But take your time when you put this back in. Make sure that it aligns and that it goes in easily. If it's not going in easily, please do not force it. That's only going to cause additional issues. All right, this one lines up over the top There's a little tab that goes into that hold down. The other piece just rests against the top. And just like the other one, there's going to be an alignment here. You're going to have to bring that over so we can get that small screw. And what better place to look for that small screw than right in the middle of the parts tray? And that's one of the reasons why I use that tray. Now that tray is only the bottom of a fast food container. And I really don't care what you use, but have an organization system when you're working on your reel so that you can know where to find the parts when you need them. All right, so this is the continuation then, and how you finish off that trip lever ring, the screw, the tie down for your bushing, and now you have the piece inside, which should turn pretty easily, well, it's turning pretty easily, doing what it should. Next up then, we're going to take the planetary gear. I'm going to do the same thing, get some grease onto the face, which is going to spin on that main gear, a little bit into the track, which is going to be the track for the oscillation gear. And even though there's nothing going on in the backside here, you can put a little bit of grease there if you like. The football goalposts go around that set on the bottom there for the side plate screw, and it just sits right in there like that. Next up then is the planetary gear. A little bit of grease on the back so it slides on the main gear, on the sides so that the teeth interact properly, and on the face because the slide will touch that. When you get that in place, just have to work this a little bit. It's not always going to line up properly. You got to get the teeth to mesh in with that planetary gear system. All right, I'm going to put the rotor on now. Before I put the rotor on, we have to make sure that the inside case is clean. I'm going to oil the trip lever. Now, if that trip lever wasn't working properly, by all means, take it off and clean it. I'm going to put a little bit of penetrating oil onto the side of the bales. I'm going to work it in. Make sure that it seats, which it does. I'm going to come underneath and I'm going to hit the trip lever and make sure that it snaps back. So this bale's in good condition. The rotor's in good condition. All we have to do is put it back on. All right, remember that little T-type stud, the keyway. Be careful with this, don't lose it. I usually have good success if I hold that with a pair of pliers, and then I find that little circle there and I seat it. When it gets seated, it needs to be pointing straight up, otherwise it won't mesh properly. You'll see the slot right here in that rotor, right there. That keyway's got to sit in that slot to hold the rotor to the pinion gear. So you do it a visual, and if you did it right, you'll see that it's seated right in there, and it's not going to go anywhere. It won't bounce out now because of the way that it sits. Next up, take that plastic tie-down nut. Let's get that on. And again, you can use a coin. You can use an old washer. You can put that in the slot. Or you can do what I do, but you make sure it's a very broad-based screwdriver if you're going to use the screwdriver. Okay, that's in place. Give it a spin. Make sure everything's working properly, which it is. And now we can complete the process then. We have the tie-down crosswind block. A bit of grease. I'm going to put that over the oscillation gear. You're going to notice that there is a little rectangular piece right on the oscillation gear, and I usually like to put a drop of oil on that. That's going to ride in the track of this tie-down block, and there is no right or wrong on the top or bottom of that tie-down block, but it does need to go over that rectangular piece. Now we're back to the axle shaft, which we cleaned earlier. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to look for just a light coating of grease, not much at all, just very light film, because if you put any more in it, it's just going to squeeze off when you go through the top. This flat side, I believe, belongs down so that it doesn't interfere with the main gear. Crosswind Block is going to let you know that. And then what you want to do as you put that axle shaft in is align the two holes in that axle shaft so that you can fit that retaining pin in there. That goes in like this. We'll take the arm now, bring the handle in, and we should be able to see a nicely functioning reel. What a difference. Now remember, we have this off on the anti-reverse because we wanted to make sure that we got all of that in easily. Let's put the anti-reverse back on. Working beautifully. Okay, so that's the idea behind why a grease-choked reel will fail, and a demonstration on how to clean it up and get it running again. So I hope you've enjoyed that. We're going to just go ahead and put the case back on, put the spool back on, and this reel will have a second chance to go fishing, and I'm sure Scott will enjoy it. Okay, sink place screw is in. There we go. Not grease choked any longer. Beautiful example of a Mitchell 306 reel, and I hope you've enjoyed that. If you did, please like it. If you want to see more, again, please subscribe. To everybody who's a first responder and essential personnel, thank you for all it is that you've been doing to keep us safe. To everybody, please stay safe, stay well, and stay watching. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.